Implied by the time wave is that around the last few seconds, those evolutionary jumps will occur around 1 million per second.
Now obviously the space-time continuum is where we are working and living in. Time travel is something which, again, science fiction talks about very much, but science is actually unsure whether time travel can actually exist. And the only time travel we might actually be able to do is actually in the mind. Whether we are actually physically stuck in this space and time is something which we don't have an answer for, and however much we have progressed over the last few decades, science-wise, actually a key question still remains unanswered.
McKenna considered the possibility that in 2012 the first time machine will be invented, and that at that point suddenly many time machines will arrive from the future because they won't be able to travel back further than the invention of the first time machine. But that did bring up the problem of the grandfather paradox, which says that if you go back in time and kill your own grandfather, then you don't exist. So he decided that the answer was that the machines wouldn't all turn up, but that somehow that the invention of the first time machine would be a gateway to eternity.
Time travel is only going to happen potentially in the mind. That brings us to certain questions, and it's there that we might have to reevaluate the role of shamanism, because shamans, the old priests of the tribes, are the only ones who actually have studied this in practical terms, if not in scientific terms. They were the ones who literally went out of their mind and saw and tried to experience what it was for the mind to be outside of the body. And ever since, and specifically since 1947, remote viewers, which are government employees who've been trained and helped both by the CIA and their Russian counterparts by the KGB, have been trying to explore this area as well. And interestingly enough, the evidence seems to suggest that material is able to come from there, and that these people are able to access information otherwise unavailable to us.
Several people have claimed in the remote viewing community that they come up against a block in 2012 which is apparently known as the discontinuity amongst the remote viewers. They're not all exactly agreed onto what happens when they get there. Some of them say it's a brick wall, they can't get beyond it. Some of them say there's a certain period they can't get beyond, but then they can get beyond further down the line, and others say that it's all hazy and there's not so many people around. You know, there's various versions of it.
So we have got this thing whereby space and time continuum seems to be reduced to our mind, and the question, what is our mind? Now, we are slowly discovering brain chemistry, neurology and all of these things, but very much about the brain still remains an unexplored frontier. If anything, we've explored outer space, but inner space is still lacking. And again, if there is a challenge for 2012, it might actually be that we need to start exploring inner space and inner realities.
As futuristic as it may be, psychologist Julian Jaynes wrote about such an idea in his 1976 book, The Origin of Consciousness in the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. He made the case that what he labeled the bicameral mentality was the normal state of the human mind worldwide as recently as 3,000 years ago. In short, he claimed that our brain once functioned totally differently. He argued that once one part of the brain appeared to be speaking, and a second part of the brain listens and obeys. The stored-up experience of the right hemisphere was transmitted to the left hemisphere via auditory hallucinations. One might say our inner voice is a type of leftover of this old brain wiring. Janes argued that this old mental model was replaced by the conscious mode of thought, which he argues is based on metaphorical language.
The brain is this vast, amazing even, reservoir of knowledge, from DNA to whatever it can do. It's absolutely fascinating. Our Western brains really have problems into trying to zoom in, tune in into a Mayan mindset. They are slightly differently wired. People like Julian James is one who has said that actually the brain is hardwired differently than from our ancestors about 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years ago. That really we live not only in different times but also occupy a different space of mind. So for us to understand what a Mayan might have meant with 2012 is really not that simple. It's not just as straightforward as we might think it is. So this brings up two interesting questions. One, is time travel possible by changing our brain chemistry? It's something which I think needs to be really explored for 2012, because if there were something out there which could actually change our brain chemistry, or for one reason or another our brain chemistry gets changed through an external factor, could be medical even, our mind might actually literally be going out of its mind all the time. And that is something which we really need to focus upon, because time travel as such and everything to do with the mind might, in a present
This is Nicole, trying out lots of beauty subscriptions, which means lots of recurring payments. So she uses
environment, our present scientific understanding, it might be literally a red pill or a blue pill away.
Stephen Gibbs claims to have invented something called a hyperdimensional resonator, which transports your astral body to another time by the use of radionic tuner dials. And Walter Rawls, who's very interested in magnetism, he conducted an experiment where he modified some glasses frames to hold a North Pole magnet up against his pineal gland. He did that for 10 to 30 minutes per day for several weeks. And over those weeks, he started to see, first of all, a semi-transparent person walk through the room, and then over the weeks it got more solid, and eventually he was completely in the scene watching this person who'd become totally solid, and then the person turned around and saw him and recognized him as the person he'd seen the previous week. So he'd become a ghost in someone else's dimension through playing around with magnetism in the pineal gland.
Most stories of time travel involve magnetic or electromagnetic fields, and it could be that these produce their effect by stimulating pineal magnetite, which causes the secretion of internal hallucinogens, of which at least 3 are known to be produced in the pineal gland.
These molecules are very, very similar to those which were ingested by Terence McKenna that enabled him to come up with this whole time wave concept. And again, very, very similar to the molecules that were ingested by the Maya shamans. And of course, probably had something to do with them fixing their calendar to 2012 as well. Geomagnetic storms have been known to cause visions in people who are particularly sensitive, such as temporal lobe epileptics and schizophrenics. And that probably has to do with the fact that there's magnetite around the pineal gland and in the bones of our sinuses. And under a shifting geomagnetic situation, that could perhaps cause the pineal gland to secrete these hallucinogenic molecules. Well, in the case of a geomagnetic reversal, which some scientists say we are now in the beginning stages of, perhaps that sort of situation of people having visions would be much more widespread.
2012 is the Mayan end time. In Christianity, the end of times is linked with the apocalypse and the return of Jesus Christ. Before a period of bliss, heaven will descend upon the earth.
The Tzolk'in is a Yucatec word meaning count of days. It concerns a 260-day calendar that is a combination of 13 numbers and 20 day signs. This was used as an almanac to find out if this was a good day for doing something on. You would go see the calendar priest, and he'd tell you if the energies for this day were compatible with what you had in mind. Every 260 days, the whole calendar repeats. Well, the long count calendar, which is the one that incorporates the 13 Bacton cycle, the one that ends in 2012, this also has a 260 unit construction because it consists, the 13 Bacton cycle consists of 260 katuns, where each katun is just under 20 years. So that the whole 13 Bacton cycle started in 3114 BC and ends on the winter solstice in 2012. Well, those 260 katuns can be mapped out on the same grid structure that we normally use to look at the Tzolk'in. And something which Jose Arguelles suggested is that as the Tzolk'in is said by anthropologists who've interviewed the Maya that still use it, it's said to be based on human gestation. When a woman misses her period, there are 260 days after that before the baby is due. So Arguelles suggested that possibly because the beginning of recorded history sort of coincides with the beginning of the 13 Bacton cycle, that maybe it somehow shows a planetary gestation, some sort of an evolutionary progression of the human race towards some significant event at the end of it.
To measure a long count date, there was a position for recording the number of days, up to 19. Then if there were 20 or more, multiples of 20 were recorded in the adjacent position. This is similar to our decimal system, except that it is 20 based, or vegesimal. The 20-day cycle is called a yunal. 18 yunals make a tune of 360 days. 20 tunes make a katun. 20 katuns make a baktun, and 13 baktuns make up the era from 3114 BC to 2012, a total of 1,872,000 days, or around 5,125 years. However, even longer cycles were used. For example, 20 baktuns is a piktun. 20 piktuns is a kalabtun. 20 kalabtuns is a chinchiltun, and 20 chinchiltuns is an alutun, or 65 million tunes, roughly 64 million years. The long count date of the start point in 3114 BC is written as the completion of 13 baktuns, with 0 katuns, 0 tunes, 0 yunals, 0 days. On the winter solstice of 2012, the same date is repeated for the first time in a span of 5,125 solar years. So it's a fact that after 5,125 years, the 13 Baktun cycle of the Mayan calendar ends. The question is, will a new cycle begin? Just as our clocks keep ticking every year on the 1st of January, or whether something else entirely will happen.
The problem is also that the long count actually was stopped at the Spanish conquest, the Mayans themselves no longer used it. And it's only in the past century that scientists and Mayans have begun to rediscover it. And 2012 as such is a relatively new phenomenon, because there is this hiatus within the Mayan civilization itself. But it's also a problem because all the expertise has been lost.
There is an incomplete inscription on the Tortuguero Monument 6 that records this 13th Baktun end date. This is the only known inscription that mentions 2012. The end date is also carved on the walls of the Temple of Inscriptions at Palenque, as well as on the so-called Creation Monument at Quirigua. But this is the previous instant of it, in 3114 BC, the last creation, while 2012 is the completion of the current creation and hopefully the start of the next one.
It's the only monument or inscription from the Classic era that's known of that mentions the year 2012 and the end of the 13 Baktun cycle. So what the Tortuguero monument says about 2012 is that in the 13th Baktun on 4 Ahau, 3 Kankin, that is 3 calendars cross-referencing one date, which we can translate as 21st December 2012, it will occur. The Bolon Yoktiku, which is the 9 support gods, will descend to the, and then we can't finish the sentence because there's damage to that last glyph. What it's saying is that in 2012 it's going to be a return of these 9 gods. There is confirmation in the Chilambalam prophecies. The Chilambalam prophecies were prophecies that were written down after the Spanish arrived, so they had been tainted with Spanish ideas. They had been carried down by word of mouth for thousands of years. One of the things that were predicted by the Chilambalams for the time of the return of these gods was that there would be a chalice of fire that would appear over the sea and a huge storm that would extinguish the sun for maybe 3 days.
In the Chilam Balam of Kumail, it says that in Katun 4 Ahau, which is in the Katun from April 1993 to December 2012, the feathered serpent god Kukulkan will return. This god originated with the Toltecs as Quetzalcoatl, and it is now known that the original Quetzalcoatl religion was based on raising a serpent-like energy up the spine, the very same concept as the Hindu concept of Kundalini. In the Aztec myth, Quetzalcoatl sacrificed himself, spending 8 days in the underworld and reappeared as Venus. He is expected to return between Venus transits, and we are now between the Venus transit of June 2004 and the next one in June 2012.
So just like the Christians are expecting the return of Jesus Christ, actually the Mayans are expecting the return of these 9 gods. They constantly talk about the 9, which they call the Bolanyoktaku or the Bolontiku. And some of them see this as 9 deities, some of them see them as one deity with almost like 9 aspects. And you don't just see them in the Mayan world, you also see them with the Aztecs. And the Aztecs, for them, see them as the Night Lords, and for them they link it to 9 levels of hell. And so 2012 is very much to do with somehow the manifestation of these entities or entity from the lower world into our reality.
The Bolon Tiku communicated with their votaries through dreams and visions. Was it these gods that Terence McKenna encountered in his visions in the jungle?
Bob McCransky claims that you can have a dream which is prompted by the Bolontiku, which is the the 9 Maya gods of the underworld, and that can be distinguished from a normal dream by the presence of a silent witness in the background, and that it turns out that this person is actually directing the progress of the whole dream. And he turns out to be one of these 9 gods who is revealing information in that dream. I did email Bob McCransky, and he confirmed to me they had what he called a kind of psychedelic experience while standing in front of the 9 altars, that is the altars to the 9 gods of the underworld at Tikal. And in that experience he realized that there were 5 male and 4 female deities, and that corresponds exactly to the combination that we have in the gods, the Ennead, the 9 gods of ancient Egypt.
Now, unfortunately, once again, we know very little about these Bulantiku, but the cult of the 9 Mayan deities has fallen into neglect within the Mayan themselves.
It's worth remembering that 250 years ago, America itself was a startup.
But what we do know is that one site, known as Tikal, was considered to be the sacred home of these Bulantiku, these 9 deities. And in fact, in Tikal there is a small pyramid, and in front of this pyramid there is a stela, and it's on this stela where you will see depictions of these 9 deities who are supposed to return.
The Bolon-Yoktiku, also known as the god of 9 steps, or 9-foot tree, nine dog tree, jaguar foot tree. These gods were present at the last creation. They were also present when the Spanish arrived, according to the texts. And if they're the same as the 9 Bolontiku, the underworld gods, those gods also were present at the last creation, and they defeated the 13 heaven gods on that occasion.
It's not the first time that I've actually come across the 9. About a decade ago, I was doing research into what would become the Stargate conspiracy, and in that book I actually tracked down, together with Clive Prince and Lynn Picknett, quite a new age phenomenon which was called the 9 as well, and we traced its origins back to 1952 and the likes of Andrija Puharic. And this was a group in New York City who were channeling entities known as the 9. And Puharic was a guy who worked for the CIA, who was involved with the remote viewing experiment, and it was he who actually brought Uri Geller from Israel to America for him to be experimented on by the CIA and to find out what was happening. All of the 9 phenomena were happening in the background of this thing. It was Puharic who was using the 9 as a private enterprise, so to speak. And not only did we find evidence of it in 1952 in New York or around Geller in the 1970s, it's also known that in the 1950s a similar experiment was going on, this time involving France and specifically Neo-Templars. And these people were taking on the guises of the 9 founding members of the Templar Order, and each one in the seance identified himself with one of these 9 founding members. 9 has been a very important number, and it's not just linked to the Mayans, but it's also linked to ancient Egypt, which is where Puharic got his information from, but it's also linked with more modern esoteric trends, specifically involving the Knights Templar.
For an understanding of how 2012 relates to the Maya calendar, we should refer to the seminal work of John Major Jenkins, who wrote a book called Maya Cosmogenesis 2012. So Jenkins shows that the site of Itzapa, which is a site where it's now thought that the Olmecs probably developed the calendar, On those inscriptions there are stories, pictorial stories from the Popol Vuh myth. This is a myth that comes from Quiché Maya, but it's now pretty well accepted by archaeologists that this goes way back into history and has formed a lot of the way of thinking of the Maya. Well, on these pictures, it's shown scenes from the Popol Vuh where the two hero twins descend into the underworld to resurrect their father, who is a solar deity. And for example, there is a depiction of the solar deity coming out of the mouth of the jaguar toad, and that represents the mouth of the toad, and also sometimes the snake or the alligator represents what we now call the dark rift, the fat bulge in the Milky Way where there's a dark area of interstellar dust clouds. That to the Maya was Xibalba, the area where their shamans travelled to bring back knowledge from the ancestors. So that was seen as the mouth of one of these reptiles, and the god coming out of the mouth represents the winter solstice sun eclipsing the galactic centre area, which is on the galactic equator, and the cross that's shown underneath that represents the crossing of the ecliptic, the path of the sun, and the actual galactic equator.
By the early 1990s, Jenkins and McKenna became more and more convinced that the end date of the Mayan 13 Baktun cycle was linked with the conjunction of the Sun with the intersection of the ecliptic and the plane of the Milky Way. Such an alignment is a major astronomical event. One can only stand in admiration that the Maya were aware of this, centuries before science was able to confirm this fact. And what to make of the coincidence of our physicist's discovery of a black...
What will you do today? Will you fall or rise to the challenge?
Black hole at the center of our galaxy, and the Mayan belief in a great black hole in the very same spot.
Now, there are several implications which we need to take into account with this one. First of all, a black hole is of course a singularity, and second, the symbolism has worked its way into Mayan mythology.
McKenna used this symbolism when he wrote, "Over millennia, the Maya observed the drama of the approach of Father Sun toward the vagina of Mother Sky. And though the cosmic event itself was calculated to occur many centuries in the future, the Maya made the future conjunction the anchor point of their machinery of cosmic timekeeping. Their myth chose our time as the quintessential moment of creation. A year before his own death, McKenna wrote how the world was perhaps not meant to end, but was to be born on December 21, 2012. This coincides with John Major Jenkins' conclusion that the ancient Maya understood something about the nature of the cosmos and the spiritual evolution of humanity that has gone unrecognized in our own worldview. This understanding involves our alignment with the center of our galaxy, our cosmic center and source, and identifies 2012 AD as a time of tremendous transformation and opportunity for spiritual growth, a transition from one world age to another.
Some years ago, Daniel Brinkley had a near-death experience. He was speaking on the telephone, I think it was 1975, and a huge bolt of lightning hit the telephone line and threw his body physically up to the ceiling, and then it crashed to the floor, and from that point on he was out of body. In the ambulance he was floating above his body still, and then a tunnel opened up in front of him, and he went down the tunnel into a really bright light and was confronted by a bright silver being, and then he relived, he had a life recall experience, after which he was taken to see a group of these 12 beings surrounding a 13th, And then they each presented him in turn a screen on which he saw scenes from the future. And there are over 300 scenes from the future between 1975 and 2012 to 2014 was when the series ended. And those scenes included things like the fall of the Berlin Wall and the explosion of the nuclear power plant at Chernobyl, well before they actually occurred. And by year 2000, there was only about 17 of these huge world events left to occur that he'd foreseen back in 1975. And they finish off with something that he says is a window of opportunity for mankind to evolve, but it will also be, there'll be a geomagnetic reversal of the Earth between 2012 and 2014, and that previous to that the Earth changes will escalate, but that this will not just be a series of catastrophes, but will also be the side effects of this window of opportunity, an evolutionary jump for mankind. And this sounds remarkably like what a Siberian geologist called Alexei Dmitriev has come up with. Dmitriev has shown that there are changes not only on planet Earth with our meteorological changes that we're seeing now, but that these are actually happening throughout the whole system, solar system, on every planet in the solar system. Atmospheric and magnetic changes are happening. And he's also said that there's a build-up of interstellar plasma on the edge of the heliosphere. So Dmitriev says that we are, like Daniel Brinkley says, that we're heading into a new energetic area of space, and this is a sort of plasma cloud of charged magnetized plasma, and that this is seeping through from the edge of the heliosphere to the sun, where it is causing increased solar activity, and that's coming out on the solar equatorial plane and affecting all the planets and causing all these changes. Dmitriev also predicts, like Brinkley, that it will result in a geomagnetic reversal and an encounter with something beyond our normal third-dimensional experience. He says it was causing a spontaneous mass evolution of mankind as we now know it. And it correlates so closely to what was seen by Brinkley that I think it's very significant.
So on December 21st, 2012, in the region where the sun is aligning with the heart of the Milky Way, known as the galactic center, we will encounter a feature known as the Dark Rift. This is known to be interstellar dust. In the Mayan creation mythology, this is called the Xibalba Bay, the road to the underworld.
Now this is where a lot of pieces begin to fall into place. First of all, the 9 gods are said to return. And for one thing, for this to work, for them...
Here's Curry again. Way downtown. Oh, what a shot from Curry!
The hardest thing in the NBA, talent-wise, everybody's kind of up here.
To return, we need to have a hero. A hero will pierce through our dimension and this underworld, and what will happen is that he will create a gateway, a stargate, a doorway, something whereby the two worlds connect. And the hero is all about sacrifice. He will sacrifice himself. He will go onto this voyage, and through this voyage the gods will be able to return. So what we're looking for, what is needed, is a new hero.
So the Hopi people who live in Arizona, they say that we are in the 4th world, and that we're currently approaching the transition to a 5th world. Now the Hopi, it's thought that they were descended from the Anasazi people, who in turn descended from the Aztecs, and the Hopi's system of a series of worlds is similar to that which the Aztecs believed in, except the Aztecs said we were in the 5th, what they called a sun rather than a world, the 5th sun approaching the 6th sun. and to the Hopis we're in the fourth world approaching the fifth world. But they saw them as past eras that ended in destruction, but that there's an evolutionary progression at each time a new world is created.
Twyla Nitsch, a Seneca elder of the Wolf clan, inherited the teachings of her grandfather, who died in 1925. She says her grandfather foresaw a 25-year period of purification leading up to the year 2012, when the earth will purge itself. This corresponds to Hopi prophecy, that the earth will go through a great purification at the start of the fifth world. Speaking Wind, a Pueblo Native American from northern New Mexico, adds that there will be a 12-year purification leading up to the year 2012. That date is recorded in his tribe's star calendars.
Credo Mutwa is a Sanazi, a Zulu Sanazi, which is a shaman, and he says that a long time ago a huge planet came into the area of our solar system, and that it caused destruction and tidal waves, and it's known as Mushoshonono. And he also says that it's due to return in the year of the Red Bull, and the year of the Red Bull is 2012. The Maori have a creation myth in which they say that years ago, at the beginning, the earth was down here and the sky was up here. That's Rangi and Papa, the two gods, were actually in a close embrace, one tightly on top of the other, and that as a result of that embrace they had children, and the children pushed their parents apart, and that's why the sky is up there and the earth is down here. One of those gods was called Tain, the god of war, and mankind is known as the children of Tain. And they say that one day when mankind is distracted and doesn't remember the old myths and the gods anymore, that the two gods will take the opportunity to crash back together again, and the earth and the sky will crash back together, and they call that the curtain will fall, which sounds like it's the end of the play and it's all over. But one of the young Maoris then got to interview the old Maoris, and it turned out that two of the words in this curtain will fall phrase have actually mutated over the years, and originally the word for curtain should have been veil, and the word for fall should have been dissolve. So they're saying the veil will dissolve, and that word veil is the same word that they use for the veil between life and death. So it's indicating crossing of our normal perceptual boundaries beyond the third dimension into that realm beyond death. There's a Peruvian spiritual messenger called Walaru Hueta. He says that the Peruvian calendar will end in 2013 when a huge magnetic asteroid comes into the solar system and causes mass death and purification.
Now, the interesting thing about 2012 is actually that we have a bit of a synchronicity, or perhaps it's just a coincidence. It's the end of a calendar, and it's also known to be a galactic alignment and a high peak of sunspot activity. Whether this is coincidence or design is something which is probably a religious debate rather than a scientific one, but it's a fact that researchers like Patrick Garill, who've been working on 2012 in extreme detail, actually believe that the sunspot cycle of 2012 will be causing so many disasters that 2012, the Mayan Prophecy of 2012, is all about this. It's a warning. And interestingly enough, it's also a theme which has been explored in a movie called Knowing, whereby science actually discovers that 2012, even though it's not said as such, but that we do live in a time.
Tell me what you're thinking.
Everyone who judged me, all the stinker thinkers that try
Whereby the sun will cause the end of civilization, if not the end of the world as such, and that this is a planetary phenomenon. So coincidence or synchronicity, nobody knows, but it is an interesting overlapping of events.
Between the 17th and 20th of January 2005, a giant sunspot the size of Jupiter spat out 5 giant solar flares. The third storm shot several billion tons of protons that traveled from the sun to the Earth in about a half an hour, much faster than the usual 2 days it normally takes for these protons to travel that distance. Incredibly, the protons were traveling at a quarter of the speed of light. Science does not have an explanation as to why. Ohio State University glaciologist Lonnie Thompson is the scientist upon which the character played by Dennis Quaid in The Day After Tomorrow is based. Thompson has assembled a mass of evidence that suggests that 5,200 years ago, the Earth experienced a climate catastrophe. He concludes that a sharp drop, then a surge in solar activity, transformed the Sahara from a green belt to a desert and shrank the ice caps at the poles.
Such a catastrophe is said to only really occur solar activity-wise every 250 million years. So for something to happen in 2012 is very unlikely, but hey, it's nature and anything is possible. However, there is one factor which we need to take into account, which is that unlike in 3100 BC, we have got an enormous amount of people living on this earth, over 6 billion people on this planet. So every small catastrophe which might have gone unrecorded in 3100 BC could have a potential of millions, if not billions of people dying at this moment in time. So it really is difficult to say what a cosmic catastrophe might be. It might be very tiny, but still very significant, but nowhere near on the same scale as 5,000 years ago.
Though normally the Earth's magnetic field shields us from the worst impacts, scientists have observed that our magnetic field in recent years is weaker than usual. Again, they do not have any real answers as to why this would be the case. Perhaps it is merely the outcome of the continuing battering it has sustained from the solar flares. Whatever the answer may be, the fact is that if the magnetic field is extremely low and the solar flares extremely violent, as they are expected to be in 2012, a climate catastrophe is inevitable. The Maya considered the great rift that was visible in the night sky to be the Xibalba Bay, the road to the underworld, the place of the 9 gods. The Maya also considered the Milky Way to be the Great Mother, a very powerful Jungian archetype, and also saw the dark rift as her birth canal. Her womb, where new life was created, was therefore the galactic center, to which the Earth will once again align on December 21st, 2012. It is clear that the Maya believed that this would be a moment in time when the Earth, the child, connected once again with the womb of its mother. Only recently have scientists been able to confirm at the center of our Milky Way there is indeed a supermassive black hole. To achieve this, they tracked the orbits of 28 stars in the Milky Way's central region over a period of 16 years. According to Reinhard Genzel of the Max Planck Institute for Extraterrestrial Physics in Germany, who led the international study team, the center of our galaxy is a unique laboratory where we can study the fundamental processes of strong gravity, stellar dynamics, and star formation. It was only in the 17th century that Europe cast away its false belief that the Earth formed the center of the universe. Science showed that we were part of a solar system. Today we know that our solar system is part of a galaxy, and that this galaxy is but one of millions of such galaxies floating in space. Science is quiet about whether our solar system could be part of a larger system, even though that is precisely what certain legends say, and which might explain some of the longer calendars the Mayans and other ancient civilizations used. This concept is similar to the idea of the Maya, who saw an alignment of the Earth with the Sun towards the galactic center as a connection between our solar system and its mother, the galactic center, a stellar nursery that sits at the center of our galaxy. The Maya described it as a cosmic womb. Modern science sees it as a unique laboratory where stars are born.
One observation that was made by Lawrence Joseph in his study of 2012, that the phenomenon is not actually linked with the suicide cults that were so prominent in the 1990s and that thought the world was going to end in catastrophe. But the consensus, apart from some doomsayers like Patrick Gerrell, is that the whole thing is about a spiritual uplifting event. So as to what might happen on a global level, it might help to look at what the Hopi people tell us, because they say that we're in the fourth world, approaching the fifth world, and our transition from one world to another is through a kind of door which they call an emergence. The whole thing is a sort of an analogy of the birth process. They symbolize this with a symbol that is identical to the Cretan labyrinth symbol.
We measure precession by the slow movement of the constellation behind the spring equinox sun every year. That is why we call it the precession of the equinoxes. The spring equinox has been in Pisces for the last 2,000 years and is now coming into Aquarius. The Maya measured precession by the slow approach of the winter solstice sun to the galactic equator, the galactic alignment. This age transition doctrine was encoded into the legends of various cultures around the world, such as the myths of Mithras, in which Mithras sacrifices a bull to save humanity from sin. This represents the transition from the age of Taurus to the age of Aries in approximately 2000 BC. Amazingly, Mithras was born in a cave on December 25th by a virgin mother and was depicted surrounded by the 12 signs of the zodiac. He represents the sun, and December 25th was once the winter solstice, when the sun dies and is reborn after a 3-day standstill. Mithras waits in heaven for the end of time, when he will return to earth and awaken the dead and pass judgment.
So there were other versions of the mystery religions around the Mediterranean area, and they all involved the flight or the voluntary death of the God-man, the flight of the spirit from the body, a descent into the underworld, a resurrection, and ascent to heaven. The whole concept is actually encoded into our own religion, and it encodes the precession of the equinoxes, the end of time, an evolutionary opportunity for mankind as a kind of rebirth experience. Just as the long count calendar, the 13 Bacton cycle, is a sort of macroscopic version of the Tzolk'in, and therefore a planetary gestation suggesting an evolutionary progression for mankind as a whole, these mystery religions seem to suggest the same thing. This point could be the point where we take our 3-day trip to the underworld, perhaps confronting our demons before then going to paradise. This could actually be a mass near-death experience.
With the 2012 phenomenon, we have truly come to appreciate the Mayan culture, as well as learn that while Europe believed the Earth was flat and the center of the universe, it was all created in 4004 BC. On the other side of the world, were a people who held a calendar that had cycles that were 5 millennia long and that knew astronomical knowledge we have only recently been able to confirm as scientifically real. If anything, in 2012, perhaps the Western imperialistic mindset will finally be able to acknowledge that, in the aftermath of 2012, it can accept that ancient civilizations knew far more about astronomy and perhaps even how the universe really works than what science is only now slowly discovering. 2012 is meant to be a milestone, the end of an age. Within this context, we are at a point where we can shift from the descending phase of the cycle to the ascending phase. At the start of a new age, the sixth sun, the Mayan creation mythology states that a new vision quest is required. Let's look at the big picture. For the world has become one global village, and we all need to adapt and learn to live with this new reality. Over the past 5,000 years, civilizations were born and civilizations were destroyed. The ancient Maya themselves never experienced the end of the 13 Baktun cycle themselves, but they planted a seed which is now growing, and come 2012 might very well blossom into a flower. The world has become one, for better or for worse. We have come a tremendously long way. But if we ever want to reach the center of our galaxy and learn about the cradle of life, we have an even long.
Spend more, save more at 4 Wheel Parts, your truck and Jeep experts.
And learn to live with this new reality. Over the past 5,000 years, civilizations were born and civilizations were destroyed. The ancient Maya themselves never experienced the end of the 13 Baktun cycle themselves, but they planted a seed which is now growing, and come 2012 might very well blossom into a flower. The world has become one, for better or for worse. We have come a tremendously long way. But if we ever want to reach the center of our galaxy and learn about the cradle of life, we have an even longer